Right now, somewhere in Europe, a federation official is on the phone with FIFA, and the conversation isn't a happy one. It's not about a missed penalty or a bad referee call. It's about flights, hotel mileage, and a 3-minute break in the middle of a match that nobody on the European side actually asked for. While millions of fans are glued to their screens watching Mbappe chase the Golden Boot and Messi rewrite his own legacy, a quieter story has been building underneath all of it. Europe is pushing back, not with outrage, not with boycotts, just a steady, mounting list of concerns that keeps growing the longer this tournament runs. Some of it is about heat, some of it is about money, some of it is about how a 48-team World Cup spread across 3 countries is testing federations that have never had to think this way before. The football itself has been brilliant, genuinely some of the best drama the tournament has produced in years. But off the pitch, the cracks are getting harder to ignore. So what's really happening here, and why does it seem like Europe specifically keeps raising its hand? To understand this, you have to go back to how this World Cup was built in the first place. This is the first 48-team edition in history, jointly hosted by the United States, Canada, and Mexico, spread across 16 stadiums in 16 cities. That's an enormous logistical undertaking even before a single ball is kicked. 12 groups of 4, the top 2 from each plus the best 8 third-place teams, moving into a new round of 32, then a traditional knockout bracket from there. It's the biggest version of this tournament that's ever existed. 16 of the 48 teams come from Europe, which means Europe has more representation here than any other confederation. England, France, Spain, Germany, Portugal, and the Netherlands are all in the mix. That matters because when this many major European federations are competing under the same conditions, any shared frustration doesn't stay quiet for long. It spreads through press conferences, through federation statements, through players speaking to their own national media. By the time the tournament actually kicked off on June 11th, warnings were already on the table. Researchers at Queen's University Belfast had flagged months earlier that wet bulb globe temperatures in several host cities could exceed even what players faced at the 2022 tournament in Qatar. That's not a small claim. It set the tone for almost everything that's followed, because once heat becomes part of the conversation, it touches scheduling, travel, recovery, and eventually the way the matches themselves are played. If you're finding this breakdown useful so far, this is a good moment to hit subscribe because we're about to get into exactly where these complaints are coming from, and it gets more specific than you might expect. Here's where things get interesting. The first major angle Europe has pushed back on is travel, and the contrast between teams is honestly kind of staggering. France, for example, has had one of the lightest group stage schedules in the entire tournament, covering roughly 334 miles between New Jersey, Philadelphia, and Boston. England and Spain haven't been nearly as lucky. England has covered around 1,721 miles between Massachusetts and New Jersey, while Spain has logged close to 1,469 miles bouncing between Atlanta and Zapopan, Mexico. For players who spend their entire club careers based in Europe, that kind of distance isn't routine. Of the squads named by England's Thomas Tuchel and Spain's Luis de la Fuente, only one player currently plays outside Europe at club level. That's a huge adjustment window for sleep, recovery, and training rhythm, especially compared to teams like Brazil or Argentina, where long-distance domestic travel is already part of normal football life. France actually went a step further than most. Their federation formally asked FIFA to reconsider parts of the travel routing, arguing the turnaround times between venues were putting unnecessary strain on players and staff. It wasn't framed as a crisis, it was framed as a fairness question. Why should some teams travel a fraction of the distance others are covering in the same tournament under the same rules? Then there's the timing problem. Nearly half of the group stage matches have kicked off between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. Central European Time. For European broadcasters and fans, that's a scheduling quirk. For players, it's a circadian nightmare layered on top of everything else. Training schedules, meal timing, and recovery windows all have to bend around kickoff times that were set with American and global broadcast windows in mind, not European sleep cycles. And it's not just the climate or the clock. Even the surface has drawn complaints. 8 of the 16 venues use natural grass laid over synthetic turf, including the stadiums hosting the final, both semifinals, and 3 of the 4 quarterfinals. Harry Kane called the pitch dry and sticky after England's pre-tournament friendly in Foxborough, and clips of unnaturally dead bounces during Senegal's warm-up matches went viral before the tournament even started. Quick reminder before we go further, if you want more breakdowns like this one as the knockout rounds heat up, subscribing genuinely helps the channel keep this kind of coverage going. But travel and heat are only part of the story. The bigger issue, the one that's actually split FIFA and UEFA publicly, is the mandatory hydration break. Back in December 2025, FIFA announced that every match at this World Cup would include 2 compulsory 3-minute hydration breaks, one in each half, regardless of temperature or stadium conditions. The idea was player welfare, consistency across every fixture so no team gets an advantage based on climate. In theory, that sounds reasonable. In practice, it's become one of the most debated features of the entire tournament. England's match against Croatia at AT&T Stadium, a fully climate-controlled, air-conditioned venue, still featured the scheduled break, and fans in the stadium audibly reacted with frustration. There was no heat to manage. The break happened anyway, because the rule applies everywhere, not just where it's needed. This matters because of what's happened around those breaks commercially. Broadcasters in the United States are estimated to have generated somewhere around $250 million in additional advertising revenue, specifically because of the extra stoppages. FIFA has consistently defended the policy as being about player safety, but the scale of that ad revenue has made it almost impossible for critics to separate the welfare argument from the financial one. Players have noticed, too. Netherlands captain Virgil van Dijk argued the breaks should be assessed match by match, not applied as a blanket rule when conditions don't call for it. Uruguay's manager Marcelo Bielsa was even blunter, saying that playing 4 periods instead of 2 changes the entire culturally understood rhythm of football, and that it adds very little while taking quite a lot away from the natural flow of the game. The bigger issue here is what UEFA has decided to do in response. Rather than adopting FIFA's blanket approach, UEFA confirmed it has no plans to bring mandatory hydration breaks into the Champions League or Euro 2028. Their existing system only triggers a break when wet bulb globe temperature actually crosses a specific threshold. Otherwise, it stays entirely at the referee's discretion. That's a direct public split between the 2 biggest governing bodies in football, and it's happening in real time while this tournament is still being played. If this kind of detailed sports analysis is your thing, take a second now to subscribe. There's a lot more of this coming as the World Cup heads into its final stretch. Beyond the rules themselves, there's a human side to all of this that's easy to lose in the noise. Ticket pricing has become one of the loudest fan complaints of the tournament. FIFA's dynamic pricing model has pushed final tickets at MetLife Stadium up to roughly $11,000 at peak demand, drawing criticism from supporters, players, and politicians, and prompting multiple state attorneys general in the U.S. to open investigations into how that pricing was set. For ordinary fans trying to follow their national team across 3 countries, that pricing sits on top of an already expensive trip. Flights between host cities, accommodation in markets that know a World Cup is in town, and in several American venues, criticism over inadequate public transit access between hotels and stadiums. None of that shows up on a scoreboard, but it shapes whether a fan actually gets to experience the tournament the way they imagined. There's also been a more serious situation involving Iran, separate from the broader European complaints, but tied into the same theme of access and fairness. After events in late February disrupted Iran's preparations, the team's training base had to relocate. Some of their ticket allocation was revoked just days before the tournament, and several coaching and administrative staff faced visa delays. On June 23rd, just 2 days before this video, U.S. authorities eased some of those travel restrictions for Iran's squad. It's a reminder that for some teams, just getting onto the pitch has been its own tournament within the tournament. Would any of this actually change how you watch the rest of the World Cup? Or is it background noise compared to what's happening on the field? That's worth sitting with for a second, because the answer probably depends on which team you're following. So where does this go from here? The best case outcome is fairly straightforward. FIFA studies what's worked and what hasn't, the way it always does after a major tournament, and some of these issues, hydration break flexibility, travel balancing between groups, pitch quality on hybrid surfaces, get adjusted before the next 48-team World Cup rolls around. UEFA's decision to hold a different line on hydration breaks already puts pressure on FIFA to revisit its own approach before Euro 2028 and the next Champions League cycle even begin. The more uncertain outcome is that none of this changes much at all. FIFA has already confirmed it's sticking with its current hydration policy for the rest of this tournament, regardless of stadium conditions or fan reaction. Critics have pointed out a familiar pattern here. Federations and broadcasters tend to raise concerns loudly when something affects them directly, but rarely organize into the kind of coordinated, long-term pressure that actually forces structural change at FIFA. Without that coordination between national associations, leagues, and broadcasters all pushing in the same direction, these same conversations could easily resurface at the next tournament with nothing different. What does feel certain is that the next 48-team World Cup, wherever it lands, will be built with this one as the reference point. Every complaint that surfaced this summer becomes data for the next bidding and planning cycle, whether FIFA chooses to act on it or not. One more reminder, if you've made it this far, subscribing really does help this channel keep putting out detailed coverage like this through the rest of the tournament. So here's where things stand. The football at this World Cup has been genuinely special. Record-breaking performances, breakout stars, and storylines that will be talked about for years. But underneath that, Europe's federations have spent this tournament raising real, specific concerns about travel fairness, about heat and scheduling, about a hydration policy that UEFA itself has now publicly rejected for its own competitions, and about ticket pricing that's pushed the cost of attending out of reach for a lot of ordinary fans. None of this means the tournament has failed. It means a 48-team, 3-country World Cup is still figuring out its own growing pains in real time in front of a global audience. Do you think FIFA actually adjusts course after this, or does the same pattern just repeat at the next one? And which of these issues, the heat, the travel, the hydration breaks, or the ticket prices, do you think matters most to how this tournament gets remembered?